of southern Tanzania, there is a territory where nature does not conform to known patterns. In this vast region, numbers and proportions break the logic of survival. Predators do not reign, prey multiply endlessly, and birds dominate the skies with astonishing abundance. But Nyerere is not a paradise of perfect balance. It is a place of constant tension, where species have had to reinvent themselves to prevail in an environment that challenges every instinct. Here, lions fail in their hunts, while dogs fight to retain their domains, and the prey, far from being passive victims, have learned to resist and succeed through cooperation. High above, the raptors keep watch, lethal and patient, while the vultures begin to feel the shortage of what they once had in abundance. Nyerere is an ecosystem where each creature has had to adapt to dynamics that are not replicated in other parts of Africa. A vast and wild space where success is not always reserved for the strongest, but for the most resourceful, for those who understand that in nature, supremacy is not an acquired right, but a daily battle. Welcome to Nyerere, a place where things are not what they seem. Nyerere National Park stretches its vast borders into the former territory of Selous, one of Africa's largest nature reserves. With more than 30,000 square kilometers of land, its vast and discontinuous territory stands as the largest protected area on the continent. Its landscape unfolds between open savanna, miombo woodland, swamps, dense scrub and extensive river courses, among which the Rufiji River stands out, the backbone of the park. This multiplicity of habitats allows for a density of wildlife that is unique in East Africa, with ecological characteristics that substantially differentiate it from the Serengeti or the Okavango Delta. But beyond its diverse landscapes, it is water that dictates the rhythm of life in Nyerere, modulating the distribution of species and conditioning every ecological interaction. The environmental dynamics in Nyerere are profoundly influenced by the presence of the water system. The Rufiji and its tributaries ensure continuous access to water for much of the year, turning their banks into vital corridors for wildlife. Their elephants converge in long columns, buffaloes advance en masse, giraffes line the more open banks, and flocks of birds fill the skies. Each species follows its own movement pattern, but all ultimately depend on the network of rivers and canals that marks the pulse of the park. There, the abundance of water creates oases of life, but it also concentrates species in a small space, intensifying competition and forcing clashes for every inch of available territory. When wildlife is squeezed into these water reserves, survival dynamics are transformed. Large herbivores gather in disproportionate numbers, creating a tapestry of moving bodies that rapidly depletes immediate resources. The surrounding vegetation is being consumed at an accelerated rate, forcing the herds to compete for areas of residual grass and less accessible banks. In the midst of this overpopulation, natural hierarchies are distorted. Elephants, normally dominant in the search for water, must share drinking troughs with herds of buffalo that do not back down so easily. The more vulnerable zebras and antelopes are forced to remain on the fringes of the commotion, alert to any sign of danger. But contrary to what one might think, this accumulation does not result in a grand feast for predators. The reason is simple. Extreme concentrations of animals do not disperse vulnerability, they dilute it. The more bodies are grouped together, the more difficult it is to isolate a victim. The lions, with their small numbers, are overwhelmed by the size of the herds, unable to isolate individuals without exposing themselves to the risk of being attacked or discovered prematurely. Wild dogs, on the other hand, being more dependent on cooperation and stealth, find their strategies sabotaged by crowding. The noise, the dust, and the constant surveillance of the prey make each ambush difficult. This phenomenon creates a funnel effect, where survival depends not only on the abundance of food, but also on each species' ability to withstand the pressure of coexisting in an environment that is shrinking daily. The competition isn't just for water or grass, but for space itself. And in this crowded environment, every move is watched. Every hunting attempt is conditioned by the presence of dozens of watchful, nervous eyes. What at first glance might seem like a paradise of opportunity turns into a scenario of constant struggle, where the pressure is on the ability to adapt to a relentless environment. This ebb and flow of climatic extremes not only redefines the landscape, it also imposes constant challenges on population dynamics, generating ecological tensions that alter the relationship between predators and prey. What's happening in this region isn't a direct consequence of human intervention, nor an effect of climate change. It's above all a reflection of an environment where nature doesn't forgive mistakes and failure to adapt is punished. In this scenario, the classic rules of survival don't always apply. When environmental pressure reaches its critical point, even the most feared predators can be thrown off balance. The environmental pressure in Nyerere is amplified by a tropical climate that offers no respite. Each species is pushed to the limits of its endurance. Temperatures can rise sharply, and rainfall, although abundant at certain times, is insufficient to balance the voracity of an ecosystem in constant demand. This leads to imbalances among animal populations. Unlike other African ecosystems where large predators dominate, Nyerere experiences a unique phenomenon. The enormous abundance of prey contrasts with the reduced presence of predators. More than 150,000 Cape buffalo inhabit the park, along with 13,000 elephants and thousands of antelopes, zebras, giraffes, and hippos. In contrast, the lion population does not exceed 4,000 individuals, while species such as the African wild dog survive in fragmented groups with worrying numbers that reveal a critical situation. This imbalance is not due to biological chance. Instead, it responds to the structural logic of the ecosystem. The vastness of the terrain, the density of vegetation in certain areas, and the diversity of microhabitats within the park make it difficult for predators to consolidate large territories. Lions, which require well-defined areas with high visibility to hunt in packs, encounter natural limitations here. In turn, spatial fragmentation prevents wild dogs, which depend on cooperation and fluid movement from establishing stable groups. Herbivores, on the other hand, have a fundamental advantage. Their diet of grass, fruit, and water requires less energy, allowing them to maintain a constant rate of feeding and growth even in harsh conditions. This situation is exacerbated by differences in reproductive cycles. For example, a zebra can give birth to a calf in just 1 year, while gazelles can reproduce in even shorter cycles, allowing for rapid population growth. Unlike lions, which face a gestation period that lasts almost 4 months and whose cubs remain dependent on their mother for at least a year, delaying the numerical growth of the pack, wild dogs, for their part, they also go through slow and complex reproductive cycles, which further limits their ability to recover their population. In Nyerere, this dynamic favors herbivorous species which reproduce more quickly and occupy space more successfully. Birds, on the other hand, find in Nyerere one of the most favorable environments on the continent. More than 450 species live among the miombo trees, the edges of lakes and river estuaries. Among them, African fish eagles dominate the skies in search of fish, while storks walk along the marshy banks with slow, precise steps. Hornbills, with their heavy flight, soar through the treetops in search of fruit, and bee-eaters, agile and swift, perform acrobatic tricks by catching insects in mid-flight. They all find abundant food and nesting areas here without significant interference. Why, in an environment where every inch of land is fiercely contested, does the sky remain an open and generous refuge? This dominance of the air is due to the relative absence of threats. Unlike the ground, where competition for food can lead to conflicts between species, the air remains a space of low ecological friction and therefore of greater reproductive success. Nyerere is not a territory defined by scarcity, rather it is an ecosystem marked by an imbalance of abundance. Dams are not only numerous, but they also have access routes to water and vegetation that allow them to avoid conflict zones. Miombo vegetation, although sparsely spaced, provides sufficient cover for species such as the greater kudu, which benefits from camouflage and silent mobility. For large predators, however, the situation is much more restrictive. Their hunting seasons are less frequent and more risky. The leopard remains in forested areas, limiting its range of activity to nighttime, while the cheetah, which prefers more open areas, only appears in peripheral regions of the park at low density. This dynamic generates a more dispersed and less territorialized fauna. Clashes between large carnivores are rare. Competition occurs silently in the difficulty of maintaining packs, in the low success rate of hunts, and in the pressure exerted by prey to survive in packs, with constant vigilance and mass movements. In many cases, lions must concentrate on young or straggling prey, as large groups of buffalo act aggressively and in collective defense. It is not uncommon for hunters to end up injured or to have to abandon their capture attempts after a failed chase. But in Nyerere, the struggle for survival is rarely resolved in a single confrontation, because interaction between species is defined by avoidance and adaptation rather than direct conflict. Prey dominate the scene, moving in large groups, alert to any disturbance. The tall grass and semi-dense vegetation make spotting difficult, and this encourages a constant game of mutual surveillance. Only on the banks of the Rufiji are there more frequent encounters, but even there, the widespread distribution of resources dilutes the need for permanent confrontation. In this complex environment, the rules of the food chain are not dictated by dominance, but by persistence. Nyerere is a refuge for species that require space, silence, and unobstructed migration routes. Human pressure is low compared to other protected areas, which has allowed certain mammals to regain ground, although the situation remains fragile. Unlike the Serengeti, where migration is the most visible phenomenon, in Nyerere, movements are more discreet, hidden, and fragmented. There's no massive spectacle, but rather a wildlife spread out in all directions, difficult to grasp in a single glance. Instead of an open savanna, there's an intricate, humid, and poorly mapped ecosystem. This boundless nature is an essential part of its nature. In Nyerere, balance depends not on the strength of the predator, but on the resilience of the prey. The atmosphere in this ecosystem is one of a silent, sustained struggle where adaptation trumps dominance and where abundance becomes a particular form of defiance. But what happens then when a hunter doesn't rely on strength but on endurance? The answer slips between the low bushes and the golden grass, embodied in a singular animal that understands the savanna as a terrain of patience and exhaustion. He has a fluid gait, a slender body, long legs, and a gaze that isn't easily distracted. There are no embellishments or extravaganzas in his silhouette. Everything about him seems fine-tuned to move, endure, and adapt. They go by many names: hunting dog, African wild dog, wild dog. But in essence, they are the last specialists of their lineage. They do not belong to the genus Canis, like wolves or jackals, and are the only living representative of their evolutionary branch. Its lineage is ancient. Its body structure distinguishes it: slim but powerful, light but resilient, and above all, it's designed to run. Not to charge, not to surprise from the shadows, but to wear down its prey until it's completely exhausted. In Nyerere, it is estimated that between 800 and 1,000 individuals still live. It is one of the most important populations in East Africa, but it is not free from threats. Roads, territorial fragmentation, human expansion, and diseases transmitted by domestic dogs, such as distemper and rabies, have reduced their numbers in many areas. Yet here in this vast and diverse park, wild dogs still find space to unfold their complex social lives. And that life begins in the pack. Unlike hyenas, with which they are often confused, African wild dogs do not organize themselves under a fierce matriarchy or operate through violent disputes over leadership. Their hierarchy is stable, functional, and based on cooperation. Only one breeding pair raises pups within each group, but all members, without exception, care for the pups as if they were their own. They feed the young, defend the territory, and distribute food with a sense of order that disarms any prejudice. The difference with the hyena is not only behavioral, it's also anatomical and ecological. Hyenas have more powerful jaws, non-retractable claws, and a more compact body. They are opportunistic scavengers, although they also hunt in packs. In contrast, wild dogs hunt almost exclusively live prey, in groups, and rarely return to a carcass. It has a thinner snout, a more flexible neck, and above all, a body designed for endurance rather than head-on collision. Its method is less brutal and more patient. Their large, circular ears are another unmistakable feature. No other canid has ear flaps of that size in proportion to their skull. They're not an evolutionary ornament, they serve a dual purpose. The first is auditory. They allow them to detect faint sounds at long distances, such as the footsteps of an antelope or the call of another member of the herd, even over a kilometer away. The second reason is temperature. In the savanna, where the sun beats down harshly, the large ears function as radiators. They dissipate heat and help regulate body temperature, which is essential during long chases. But the African wild dog's adaptation doesn't stop at its musculature or the precision of its senses. There are details that, though subtle, are key pieces in its evolutionary process. The long, always erect tail plays a fundamental role in social dynamics and hunting. At first glance, it may seem like a minor detail, but in the field, it acts as a visual symbol. During chases, when tall vegetation can hide individuals, the raised tail allows members of the pack to follow each other without losing coordination. It is a moving guide, visible even among the tangle of bushes, but its function isn't just tactical. In the wild dog's social language, the tail is a constant channel of communication. A relaxed tail conveys calm. A vibrant twitch can indicate excitement or an implicit command to start running. A rigid posture, with short movements, alerts to the presence of danger. In everyday interactions, such as greetings or cohesion games, the tail accompanies gestures, strengthens bonds, and maintains group structure. In an environment where the precision of teamwork can mean the difference between life and death, every part of the African wild dog's body appears to have been sculpted with a purpose, even that which from a distance might seem like just an ornament. In theory, every cog performs its function with precision, but it's in the hunt that this machinery comes alive, where every gesture, every signal, and every stroke of movement is linked in a choreography that leaves no room for error. How does this evolutionary perfection translate to the battlefield? At dawn, when the air is still light and the ground isn't burning, a group sets off. There's no commotion, just glances, brief movements, minimal signals. One smells the wind, another raises his snout, and everyone understands. In the distance, among the low bushes, a small herd of impalas moves. It's a group of juveniles, some distracted, others attentive. The dogs move forward, but not together. They scatter like a net unfolding with precision. Some skirt the left flank, others appear from the front. They don't hide. They make themselves visible. The impalas react. They jump, they turn, they regroup, and then they run. That's the signal the dogs were waiting for. It's not a chaotic race, it's a tactic. One chases, two push to the right, another advances diagonally. They don't need explosive speed, they need consistency. They keep the rhythm. The dust rises, but there are no gasps or screams. After several minutes of non-stop stalking, the impala herd disperses. One of the young animals lingers just a little, just enough. The dogs don't reach him immediately, they box him in. They surround him. They cut off his exits with calculated movements. They exhaust him. And when they finally pounce on him, they do so without drama. It's a quick, efficient act. There's no fight, just a precise kill. The remarkable thing happens soon after because, surprisingly enough, the food is not monopolized by the dominant adults. It is offered first to the cubs, then to the others. The members left behind, guarding the den, will also receive food later, regurgitated by those who participated in the hunt. There are no disputes, no aggressive barking, just taking turns and a harmony that contradicts the ferocious image often associated with African predators. Their hunting style also reflects this pack mentality. Everyone collaborates, everyone obeys a common logic. There are no leaders who impose decisions by force. The alpha couple guides but doesn't dominate. And when one falls, the others don't easily abandon them. Species have been seen carrying food for miles to feed an injured companion, or staying with a sick puppy much longer than biological logic would allow. This social cohesion, this silent efficiency, is one of the reasons why the species has survived despite human pressure. But it is also their greatest fragility. A dismembered group does not easily reassemble itself. If too many adults die, if a virus enters the herd, or if cattle trails interrupt their hunting routes, the system cracks. The wild dog is not a lone wolf. It cannot survive without its pack. In Nyerere, patrols of 10, 15 or 20 can still be seen. Mottled silhouettes, light bodies, ears alert, moving in the wind. Each encounter is a reminder that it is still possible to preserve the complex, the collective, the vulnerable. Here on these plains, where everything seems eternal and yet everything changes, the wild dog continues to forge its path. But what about those who don't need the precision of a team? What happens to species that have found their greatest strength in immobility? While cooperative hunting predators face a silent decline, herbivores find Nyerere an unusual setting for expansion. The African wild dog, a specialist in collective hunting, struggles to maintain its numbers in an environment that favors vigilance and grouping of prey. In contrast, species like the hippopotamus thrive with a stability rarely seen elsewhere on the continent. In the heart of Nyerere, the Rufiji River system and its many lakes form an ecosystem where the hippopotamus has found an exceptionally favorable habitat. The constant presence of water allows hippos to maintain a constant feeding schedule and efficient thermoregulation during their resting hours in the water. Their thick fur, which can measure several centimeters, acts as a natural barrier to retain moisture and protect them from intense heat. This physiological adaptation is not only essential for their daily survival, but is also complemented by social behavior that minimizes the risk of predation. Organized in territorial groups that aggressively defend their members and the space they occupy, these individuals consolidate a collective protection system that limits external threats. From an evolutionary point of view, the hippopotamus represents a curious and revealing case. Although strictly herbivorous, the hippopotamus exhibits an anatomy that transcends the passivity of its diet. Its bulky body, powerful jaws, and sharp tusks are not hunting tools, but rather serve as defense and competition tools. This combination of strength and endurance is reflected in other large herbivores on the continent, such as the gorilla, which, despite feeding almost exclusively on vegetation, developed impressive musculature and a specialized digestive capacity to process high-density cellulose. In both cases, anatomy responds less to direct predation and more to the need to sustain a body capable of facing the physical pressures of its environment, whether external threats or disputes within the species itself. This combination of adaptations is clearly reflected in the territorial dynamics maintained by these specimens in Nyerere. Each group secures and patrols defined areas where dominant males fiercely guard and defend the boundaries of their territory. This ensures access to essential resources and spaces for reproduction, while avoiding local overpopulation that could affect food availability. However, this balance is not immutable. In an environment where water defines borders, a prolonged drought is enough to strain the rules of coexistence. What happens then, when the channels narrow and the pools become the last available refuges? Under these circumstances, social dynamics within hippopotamus groups become even more rigid. Hierarchies, which in times of abundance ensure stable coexistence, become mechanisms of fierce control over resources. Dominant males intensify their vigilance, regulating access to resting areas and scarce bodies of water with increasing aggressiveness. This vigilance is not limited to rivals of their own species. They also extend their defense against potentially dangerous intruders such as crocodiles, which they confront with the same determination. However, no matter how strict this surveillance is, the limits of water impose their own rules. Unlike other herbivores, which respond to drought by undertaking long migrations in search of new pastures, hippos are more closely tied to water. Their movements are short, conditioned by the permanence of the bodies of water, being a pattern that has a very high cost. As options narrow, the concentration of individuals in the same spaces increases, intensifying direct competition. Subordinate males, females with young and growing juveniles, are forced to share increasingly smaller resting areas, where every bit of shade and every access to fresh water becomes a source of tension. This is where the hippopotamus's physiological adaptations, such as its ability to retain moisture through its skin and its nocturnal grazing habits, prove essential to its survival. During the hottest hours of the day, water serves as their primary thermal refuge. Even so, their body size can be so disproportionate that they often fail to fully submerge, leaving large areas of their back and head exposed to the sun for long periods, making them critical areas for moisture loss and the risk of sunburn. To counteract these effects, hippos secrete an oily fluid with protective properties that acts as a barrier against solar radiation and helps retain moisture in their skin, preventing damage that could compromise their health. These physiological adaptations are even more vital in an environment where predator pressure is low, a factor that decisively influences the hippopotamus's population dynamics. Lions and wild dogs, although expert hunters, rarely confront healthy adults due to the strength and aggressiveness of these large herbivores. This balance between physiological adaptation and ecological context refers to an evolutionary past that defines the hippopotamus's uniqueness in the ecosystem today. Evolutionarily, hippopotamuses are descendants of semi-aquatic ancestors that adapted to a way of life closely linked to water and riparian vegetation. Unlike other terrestrial ungulates, its lineage evolved a unique combination of characteristics adapted to life both in and out of water, consolidating a strictly herbivorous diet but with a defensive anatomy that ensures its survival. This balance between food, defense, and environmental adaptation is the result of constant selective pressure, which has shaped a species perfectly integrated into the complex ecosystem of Nyerere. However, this balance can be fragile. In the shadows of this vast territory, the tensions between life and death unfold silently, often imperceptible to those observing from afar. What happens when the apparent calm of the waters hides an unexpected danger and the predator's patience translates into a hidden opportunity? On the surface of the Rufiji River, the tranquility is deceptive. At first glance, everything looks like a mirror of murky water, still and heavy, dotted with water lilies and green shadows reflected from the shore. But beneath that thick layer of suspended mud, a silent presence glides, barely betrayed by the small islands formed by its nostrils and eyes protruding from the water. Almost completely submerged, its silhouette is blurred, confusing the untrained eye. In these waters, the difference between life and death often depends on correctly interpreting what cannot be seen. A lone hyena approaches the shore. The midday heat drives it to search for food where options seem scarce. Amidst the play of reflections, he sees a small, static, semi-submerged figure. It's an amorphous lump that could be anything, but for the ever-hungry hyena, it represents an opportunity. She wades into the water with slow steps, the mud trapping her every move, but the promise of weak prey, perhaps an isolated calf, keeps her moving forward. But what he hasn't realized yet is that he made a fatal mistake. He underestimated the magnitude of his adversary, and in an instant that shatters the stillness, the silhouette rises from the water. The hippopotamus's body emerges in an unstoppable ascent, revealing a mass of muscle and bone twice the size of the intruder. The hyena, trapped in the mud, tries to turn, but its maneuver is clumsy. The hippopotamus doesn't falter. It advances with a speed that belies its size, carving furrows in the water with each powerful stride. The scavenger escapes, panting, pursued by the stern gaze of the hippopotamus, who neither forgets nor forgives insolence. With a final effort, the hyena manages to free herself from the mud and reach the shore, soaked and breathless. His escape is messy, but sufficient. He escaped for mere seconds, leaving behind the echo of a mistake that, at another moment, could have been fatal. In Nyerere, appearance is a weapon, and today the hyena has learned it the hard way. Minutes later, as the river returns to its slumber, a group of small oxbills descends from the riverside trees. Fearlessly, they perch on the hippopotamus's back. They walk along its back as if it were a floating island, pecking rapidly, tearing off tiny fragments of its cracked skin. The hippopotamus, which moments before was a raging rage, now remains motionless, indifferent, allowing the birds to carry out their meticulous work. Why does this giant, which does not tolerate the intrusion of a predator, accept without protest the presence of these tiny visitors? This mutual relationship is one of the oldest and most effective in the ecosystem. Each bird finds sustenance in the broken skin of its host, extracting parasites, larvae, and bacteria that, if accumulated, could trigger dangerous infections. For the hippopotamus, it's a vital form of cleansing, a form of biological maintenance that allows it to keep its skin healthy in an environment where wounds, mud, and constant humidity are a latent threat. The same river that has been the scene of violence also becomes a space for silent coexistence. Around the hippopotamus, flocks of ducks swim leisurely, taking advantage of the choppy water. There is no explicit pact, but both know that this interaction is beneficial. When the hippos wade along the riverbed, they stir up sediments rich in organic matter, bringing small organisms to the surface on which the birds feed. The hippopotamus neither wins nor loses in this exchange, but its presence is key to maintaining this dynamic. It is a practical commensalism based on indifference and an abundance of resources. Sometimes this same coexistence extends to other giants. Nile crocodiles, which share the same waters, maintain a relationship of tense respect with hippos. It's not an alliance, nor is it war, simply coexistence. Despite their ferocity, crocodiles avoid direct confrontation with adult hippos. It's not just a matter of size, but of temperament. Territorial and unpredictable, hippos brook no provocation in their immediate surroundings. As long as there is sufficient territory and resources, peace is maintained. But if a crocodile dares to get close enough, the hippopotamus's response is immediate and devastating. Nyerere's invisible hierarchy is based on these codes. The hippopotamus doesn't need to constantly flaunt its strength. Its mere presence is enough to shape the river's dynamics. Each species that shares its space knows its limits. Hyenas learn to respect its distance, birds find it a mobile refuge, and crocodiles accept its supremacy as a non-negotiable fact. In an ecosystem where competition is often resolved with violence, the hippopotamus sets its rules differently. It does not hunt, it does not need to stalk, but it exercises absolute control over its territory, tyrannically determining who can approach and who must move away. The alliances it allows are based on utility, not affinity. Its coexistence with birds is an example of self-interested cooperation, but also of evolutionary wisdom. In nature, pacts are not about loyalty, but about mutual benefit. However, while this stability persists in the water, in other parts of the park, the balance is more fragile and dynamic. Not all species enjoy the same control over their environment or the same ease in adapting to upcoming changes. Large predators, once the undisputed masters of these lands, now face a scenario that challenges their supremacy and redefines their roles within the ecosystem. How does the king of the savannah adapt when the rules he once dictated begin to change? For centuries, the lion held an undisputed place at the top of the African imagination. A symbol of strength and dominance, it was portrayed as the supreme apex of the food chain. However, in the plains and savannas of Nyerere National Park, something is changing. Far from the heroic narrative that usually surrounds them here, the lions face one of their greatest challenges. They no longer hunt as frequently as before, and the pressure of a new ecological balance is pushing them to the margins of a territory they once dominated with ease. The decline in the lion population within the park is not due to a single cause, but rather a combination of silent but cumulative factors. Habitat fragmentation, a relative decline in accessible prey, and an increase in contagious diseases are all present. But what is most significant is another phenomenon, the growing defensive organization of herbivores. In Nyerere, prey groups have begun to tip the balance. Domestically, lion prides are feeling the impact. Successful hunts, which once marked the rhythm of social life, are now becoming more rare. Food shortages alter group chemistry. Tensions arise between females, alliances between relatives weaken, and dominant males are constantly challenged by younger males who detect signs of weakness. The hierarchy becomes unstable when food is scarce, and night roars, rather than announcing power, betray hunger. But it's not just their bodies that suffer. Their strategies are also being tested in an increasingly demanding environment, because prey has long since ceased to be mere targets. Zebras, among others, perform surveillance rotations at the fringes of the herd, while wildebeest maintain unpredictable movement patterns that make it difficult for their hunters to predict. Buffaloes, for their part, act as a compact, defensive unit that protects their young with relentless discipline. It's no longer enough to be stealthy. Lions must adapt to a collective intelligence that is becoming increasingly demanding and leaves no weaknesses uncovered. How do they cope with hunting when each prey acts with such coordination and alertness? One hot afternoon on the vast plains near the Rufiji River, the migration season reaches its peak. It is one of the most crucial times of the year for prey, which travel great distances in search of resources that are scarce due to the drought. For the lions, this mass mobilization represents a rare and valuable opportunity to feed. In the midst of this scene, a herd of felines detects a group of wildebeest and zebras moving slowly south. More than 200 animals advance like an undulating mass, leaving tracks that hunters have followed for days. Hidden behind a modest rise in the terrain, they watch in complete silence. The wind is blowing in their favor. Everything seems to be lining up for a perfect attack. The group lines up. 2 lionesses take the lead on the left. Another takes up position on the opposite flank. Behind, a young male waits for the signal. Each one knows his role. The intention is clear: to cut off the rear guard, isolate an individual, and corner him before the group reacts. But something happens as soon as the attack begins. A hasty stride, a miscalculated sound, or simply the heightened sensitivity of the prey. The reaction is immediate: a stampede. There is no disorder, but a mass that spins like a well-trained wave. The lions try to intercept, but the speed and density of the group overwhelms them. Each animal seems protected by a wall of bodies. Even the slowest young are surrounded by adults who block any attempt to separate them. One of the lionesses charges at what she believes to be an opening, but is caught in the flow. Pushed and battered, she struggles to retreat. Her right flank is bleeding from a poorly received kick. When the dust settles, the group of prisoners has already crossed the field. The lions were left behind alone, exhausted and without reward. Frustration manifests itself in tangible ways. Fatigued muscles with no energy left to recover, empty stomachs, inaccurate movements. In the days that follow, the pack is forced to resort to smaller prey: lizards, stragglers, or abandoned remains. But the protein density of these sources is not sufficient to maintain the group's physical condition. Cubs grow weaker and older lionesses begin to lose muscle mass. Cooperative hunting, which requires strength, endurance, and precise coordination, is beginning to fail more frequently, and this case isn't unique. The same pattern is repeated in other areas of the park. Entire packs have retreated to marginal, less fertile areas where they compete with hyenas and jackals for minimal resources. The lion's roar, once an expression of dominance over the landscape, is now more sporadic, more cautious. This isn't the end of the lion, but it is an inevitable transition toward extinction. In recent years, the balance of power on the Nyerere plains has begun to shift. Big cats no longer rule the roost. The silence that follows a stampede does not always leave behind a motionless body. Increasingly, predators retreat on empty stomachs, while herbivores, far from being mere prey, demonstrate the effectiveness of an evolution that perfects every detail. Sharper peripheral vision, faster reaction times, precise spatial memory, and a group organization that is reinforced with each failed hunting attempt. Wildebeest, zebras, buffalo, impalas, giraffes, different species, but united by a strategy that transcends individual instinct: cooperation. What at first glance appears to be a chaotic mass of fleeing bodies is actually a system that responds to threats with surprising precision. During migration, wildebeest and zebras share routes, rivers, and grasslands. They don't form conscious alliances, but their functional coexistence optimizes vigilance. Wildebeest detect danger with their keen hearing. Zebras anticipate it with their prodigious eyesight. Together, they form a synergy that reduces errors. A lion can choose its prey, but it rarely predicts how the group will respond. Cooperation also occurs among equals. Some species, such as Cape buffalo, react collectively when an individual is attacked. A pack can turn around, form a circle, and launch a counterattack that disorients even the most skilled hunter. Others, like impalas, benefit from maintaining high numbers, statistically diluting the risk. The strategy, although different, follows the same logic: resist without confrontation, survive without risking more than necessary. This collective intelligence has begun to tip the balance. Today, hunters fail more often, but not everyone is giving up in the face of this new outlook. Some lions, the most experienced, are males who have witnessed the rise and fall of multiple territories. They hone their technique, isolate themselves, perfect their ambush, and wait. They are fewer in number, but when they decide to attack, they do so with brutal precision. Sometimes just one is enough to fracture the defenses of an entire pack. These moments are rare, but intense. A single roar can change the course of an entire day. At the same time, a new generation of lions in Nyerere is beginning to push in from the margins. They are the young lions who have been pushed out, those who have yet to claim their own domain, wandering, restless, aggressive. They attack not methodically, but with urgency. If one of them manages to hunt, they gain more than just food. They gain a chance to demonstrate that they can break the old order, that they can be the ones to occupy the center of the plain. But in an ecosystem where every drop and every sprout count, what happens when the dispute is not between hunter and prey, but between those who, in theory, should be on the same side? In years of low rainfall, watering points become arenas for open competition. At the edges of the ponds, the bodies of the zebras jostle, colliding in a shoving dance for a space by the water. Further on, groups of wildebeest advance with short, insistent charges, displacing rivals to gain access to the wet mud where tender stems are still sprouting. From the depths of the dry riverbed, elephants burrow with the strength accumulated over centuries. Their mere presence imposes retreats. They advance without violence, but with an authority that reconfigures the order with every step. However, even that dominance can be challenged if the heat continues for too long. In the canopy, giraffes crane their necks toward the last untouched leaves, but they don't always find the exclusivity they seek. Around them, kudus and impalas try to reach the lowest branches, and even zebras, reluctant to give in, venture to challenge them for food. The conflict doesn't always escalate, but it exists. Shoving, growling, urine, and fecal markings demarcate disputed territories. But there are days when scarcity does not allow for negotiation. A young, inexperienced giraffe cranes its neck toward a low bush, unaware that another diner has already claimed it. A male kudu, shorter but determined, raises its head in a brief, almost mechanical gesture. There's no warning, just a sharp movement. The antlers impact the giraffe's front legs, which stumbles, forced to retreat. It's not a fight. There's no chase, just the momentum of a competition that allows for no distractions. In Nyerere, every space, every leaf, every drop must be defended with the conviction that it may be the last. And yet, when scarcity reaches its breaking point, individual confrontations are no longer sufficient. The crowds take to the march. Every year, thousands of individuals undertake migration in search of greener areas, but the ability to anticipate these movements varies among species. The first to break the stasis are the zebras. Their compact and disciplined groups begin their march with a clear purpose: to move away from already grazed areas before the shortage becomes irreversible. Their route memory and sense of direction lead them to avoid depleted areas. Behind them, like an organized shadow, the wildebeest advance. They follow the clear paths, taking advantage of the open trails, although their dependence on the trails of others is a double-edged sword. When they arrive too late and the grass has been completely destroyed, they don't stop. They seek out other, less traveled pastures, sometimes straying far beyond their usual routes, risking uncertainty to find enough food. This adaptability is key to their survival. These constant movements and pressure for resources mark an invisible rhythm that sustains life in Nyerere. Migration is not only a physical journey, but also a reflection of an ecosystem that reinvents itself at every step, where each individual contributes to the dynamics of the whole. And the consequences of this new order are felt even in the most basic aspects: reproduction. In recent years, birth rates among herbivores have increased. The young survive beyond the first few weeks. Mothers have more constant access to food and water. The ecosystem apparently is celebrating a favorable cycle for those who do not hunt but escape. But that prosperity won't last indefinitely. The predator population, although dwindling, remains a real threat, even more so when conditions become adverse. A particularly harsh, dry season can push carnivores to form unusual alliances, to take greater risks, to attack without waiting for the perfect moment. And there, on that border where the success of some meets the hunger of others, is where the true heart of Nyerere is defined. Not in the perfect hunt, nor in the glorious stampede, but in the constant friction between strategies that seek each in its own way to continue existing. But while tensions mount on land, another story unfolds silently, floating above the fierce competition. What's happening up there, where the rules of the land seem to have no weight? Across the vast expanse of the national park, where the savanna intertwines with lagoons and the Rufiji River meanders like a vital artery, birds have found not only refuge but also supremacy. While on the ground the struggle for survival becomes increasingly uncertain, above, dominance is clear and absolute. Nyerere, with its more than 30,000 square kilometers, is a paradise of contrasts. Its terrain, fragmented into a mosaic of river islands, riparian forests, and calm estuaries, creates a natural architecture that favors birds. Tall trees such as acacias and tamarinds offer strategic vantage points. Dense reed beds on the banks of lagoons provide impenetrable cover, and open expanses of water allow for hunting maneuvers impossible in other African ecosystems. The key to the bird's success in Nyerere lies not only in the abundance of food, but in the diversity of niches that this ecosystem provides. In the waters, fish and amphibians support kingfishers, herons, and Pell's owls. On the margins and in clearings, insects, small reptiles, and mammals are prey for birds of prey such as the crowned eagle. And in the skies, the air becomes a highway and a stage where species move freely, unhindered by terrestrial barriers. Rufiji River acts as the great provider. Its nutrient-laden waters support a food chain that begins with schools of fish and extends to the most specialized birds. But what makes Nyerere unique is the way these birds have learned to read every detail of their environment. They detect variations in water level, perceive the brightness of a school of fish from tens of meters away, and adjust their flight paths according to the pulsations of the ecosystem. It's not chance, it's knowledge acquired over generations. Nyerere birds have perfected coexistence strategies that allow them to share territory without destructive competition. Colonies of herons nesting communally, kingfishers occupying different heights in the same tree, eagles defining their hunting radius to avoid interference. The park's vertical structure, with its network of branches, water, and open sky, allows each species to find its own space, adjusting its behavior to maximize success and minimize conflict. This cooperation also translates into the synchronization of activities. When the first rays of sunlight touch the water, herons gather in choreographed movements to search for food. At the same time, the kingfishers, masters of detail, plan zigzagging routes just inches above the water, while high above, crowned eagles circle in wide circles, silently observing. This coordination isn't born of pacts, but rather of specialization perfected over generations. Each species has fine-tuned its timing, flight altitude, and hunting technique to minimize direct competition. Herons prefer clearings at dawn when the light favors their vision in shallow waters. Kingfishers take advantage of the morning calm before the wind disturbs the surface. Eagles, on the other hand, patrol from high above, covering areas that others cannot, hunting prey that rarely coincides with that of their winged neighbors. This dance of specializations not only avoids unnecessary confrontations, but also turns the sky into a territory where competition transforms into pure efficiency, freeing birds from the restrictions that imprison hunters on the ground. Because while lions and wild dogs depend on accessible hunting areas, birds display a three-dimensional map where the limitations of the terrain are irrelevant. They can move in search of food, nest in safe places, and change their habitat according to climatic or seasonal variations. Habitat fragmentation, which affects so many terrestrial predators, doesn't have the same impact on those who can cross distances in a matter of minutes. However, life in the air isn't a simple ballet of success. Birds also face challenges. The unpredictable flooding of the Rufiji can wipe out nesting colonies, and competition at high altitude, although regulated, remains a silent struggle. Resident species, which know every nook and cranny of the park, have a clear advantage over migratory species, which depend on routes and cycles that are sometimes altered by subtle climate changes. In Nyerere, the bird's success is based on an equation of mobility, perception, and adaptability. Their spatial intelligence, ability to read patterns in fish distribution, collective synchronization, and ability to redesign their routes day by day have allowed them to thrive in an environment that, while teeming with life, is relentless in its fluctuations. When the earth becomes a field of unpredictable battles, the air remains a realm of opportunity. Birds have understood better than anyone how to take advantage of Nyerere's verticality, how to build a stability in the heights that is increasingly difficult to achieve on the ground. And in that same verticality, there are hunters who take advantage to its maximum expression. Nyerere's birds doesn't seek carrion, nor does it settle for fish or amphibians. Their prey are larger vertebrates, monkeys, medium-sized birds, and occasionally even young antelopes. But today, his attention is focused on a different goal: From above, their eyes, capable of discerning minute movements hundreds of meters away, detect a clearing among the treetops. There, a family of guineas scamper about unsuspectingly, relying on the cover of the undergrowth. But the advantage of height doesn't allow for deception. The eagle folds its wings and falls like an arrow. The shadow barely touches the ground when the impact occurs. The dagger-sharp claws close on the victim before the first scream can echo through the thicket. The other guineas stampede away, but the scene is over in seconds. There was no chase, no physical exertion, just the application of an absolute advantage. Dominance of the air. The eagle doesn't stay there for long. With a couple of flaps of its wings, it lifts its prey and carries it to a hidden nest high above. This successful and seemingly effortless hunt is not just about individual skill, but also about the freedom that flight gives them to dominate a territory that is increasingly difficult to control on the ground. In times of drought, when waterways dry up and flocks migrate in search of greener pastures, the crowned eagle does not depend on predictable routes or stationary prey. It can leave Nyerere if required and dispute territories with other lower-ranking birds in more fertile areas. This aerial dominance explains in part why birds thrive in Nyerere. Absolute mobility allows them to circumvent scarcity, adapt to seasonal fluctuations, and maximize resources dispersed across the territory. Unlike terrestrial predators, tied to the rhythm of migrations and the toughness of competition on the ground, birds can exploit temporary microhabitats, a fleeting pool, a concentration of insects, a school of fish trapped in a bend in the river. In addition to this mobility, the abundance and diversity of water is a fundamental pillar of its success. In Nyerere, wetlands are not an exception, but a constant. Seasonal rains, combined with the flooding of the Rufiji, create a labyrinth of interconnected lagoons where aquatic life multiplies with each cycle. Birds find these spaces an inexhaustible source of food, as well as a safe haven. Not everything is passive abundance. Cooperation and intelligence also play a crucial role. Some species, such as certain herons, take advantage of the shade cast by large trees to hunt insects that take refuge in the leaves, while others, such as some raptors, patrol in pairs, covering larger areas in search of prey. Efficiency lies not only in anatomy, but in the ability to adapt their habits to momentary opportunities. The contrast with ground-based predators is becoming increasingly evident. While they see their domains restricted by habitat fragmentation and human pressure, birds find a territory without borders in the sky. Their routes know no boundaries, and their prey, dispersed but abundant, guarantee a more stable feeding cycle. In Nyerere, flying isn't just about getting around. It's about the privilege of deciding when to leave, where to go, and what opportunities to exploit. The bird's success in this ecosystem is no coincidence, but the result of millions of years of adaptation to an environment that rewards mobility and acute perception. But what happens when some winged species can't afford that luxury? While herons, kingfishers, and crowned eagles take advantage of the abundance of rivers and lagoons, other birds face increasingly adverse terrain. The vulture, an inescapable symbol of the African food chain, faces a silent but relentless challenge. Unlike species that hunt, fish, or gather, its existence depends on what others leave behind. In this ecosystem, where prey thrive and predators face decline, the vulture feels the direct impact. The decline of lion prides and the critical situation of African wild dogs have drastically reduced the amount of carrion available. For a bird that neither hunts nor kills, the scarcity of remains translates into a larger territory to patrol and fierce competition for every opportunity that arises. At first glance, one might think that a park of more than 30,000 square kilometers guarantees inexhaustible resources. But the current dynamics of Nyerere have changed the rules. The vulture's strategy now focuses on seeking out spots where the odds are highest, banks where crocodiles lurk, elephant or buffalo carcasses that succumb to natural causes, and, to a lesser extent, following solitary predators such as wandering hyenas hoping to bring down some prey. The vulture's adaptation isn't based on speed or aggressiveness, but on efficiency. From impossible heights, they survey every corner of the terrain, alert to any sign of death, abnormal movements of other birds, circling flight patterns, and even changes in the behavior of herbivores. Their vision is their best tool, capable of clearly distinguishing ground textures from miles away. But even with this advantage, their room for maneuver is limited. Unlike hunting birds of prey, the vulture is influenced by factors beyond its control. Daytime thermals, which allow it to glide effortlessly, dictate its hours of activity. If the weather is not cooperative, the vulture remains anchored to high altitudes, unable to track efficiently. Furthermore, its physical structure, designed for gliding and endurance, prevents it from performing rapid movements in pursuits or agile maneuvers like those of other birds. Migration to other regions might seem like an obvious solution, but it isn't. Vultures depend on entire food webs, and changing their territory doesn't always guarantee better conditions. Constant of the Nyerere in Nyerere, the vulture faces a disrupted equilibrium, but it remains an essential cog in the ecological machinery. Its role as a scavenger prevents the remains of dead animals from becoming breeding grounds for disease, keeping the ecosystem in a constant cycle of renewal. But what happens when that patience is tested once again, and nature offers no gifts? Over the sun-baked plains, a small group of vultures circles the sky. Below them, a lone hyena cautiously advances. The hope is clear. If the hyena succeeds, the vultures will have their chance. The aerial patrol follows every step, maintaining formation, keeping watch from above. Hours pass, and the hyena, after sniffing and traveling for miles, finally detects a different scent. In the undergrowth, a fresh carcass, small but enough to satisfy its hunger for a while. The hyena approaches quickly, taking advantage of the opportunity for surprise. While it feeds, some vultures begin to descend slowly, taking up positions around it, assessing the terrain with a practiced eye. But the feast won't be easy. In the distance, hurried footsteps can be heard. Another pack of hyenas is approaching, drawn by the scent. The vultures tense their wings, ready to take flight at any moment. The lone hyena growls, raising its head alertly, aware that its prey is as valuable as it is ephemeral. Tension grows in the air as the competition approaches. Then the vultures take flight, not to surrender, but to wait. They know that the hyena, after satisfying its hunger, will leave the body half-eaten. It is only a matter of time before he moves away and leaves the place, at which point they will silently descend, collecting what is left, perpetuating the unbroken cycle of life in Nyerere. As the vultures watch from the skies, their patience becomes the key to facing Nyerere's constant uncertainty. They rely not only on strength or speed, but on persistence in a game that often requires them to wait hours, even days, for the right opportunity to present itself. This waiting is not passivity, but a strategy that keeps them alive in an ecosystem where nothing is certain and every move has consequences. The vulture's life has no room for error. Every kilometer flown unsuccessfully is a waste of energy that is not easily recovered. But unlike land-based predators, their resilience lies in patience. Nyerere has taught them that abundance is not always immediate, and that their survival depends on a balance that, although shaky, still provides them with space. Even with the difficulties, the vultures continue to be tireless sentinels of Nyerere. They don't celebrate death, but they need it. In an environment where hunters fail, their strategy is waiting. And although today that wait may be longer than expected, his presence guarantees that, when the opportunity arrives, the cycle of life will close with the same precision as always. Vultures are just one of the many pieces in the complex web of life that sustains Nyerere. This vast territory unfolds like a mosaic of habitats where every element, from air to water, plays a fundamental role. Among these elements, the waters of the Rufiji River slowly flow through the landscape, laden with sediment and life. This constant current shapes the shores and marks the pulse of the ecosystem, where every movement beneath its surface reveals a world hidden from the unsuspecting eye. This river, the largest in Tanzania, stretches for more than 600 kilometers from the Uluguru Mountains to merge into the Indian Ocean. Beyond its length, its true value lies in the way its changing and capricious flow imposes the rules of survival in the region. During the wet season, their overflows flood plains, feed temporary lakes, and paint the landscape a vibrant green. When the dry season arrives, the riverbed narrows, the current slows, and water, now scarce, becomes the most precious resource. Unlike other African ecosystems where water resources are sporadic and dispersed, Nyerere concentrates a continuous flow in the Rufiji River that sustains a density of wildlife rarely matched. Waterfowl, herbivores, predators, and scavengers converge on its banks, each species depending on the river in different but interconnected ways. In its waters, hippos find the necessary refuge to withstand the harsh temperatures of the savanna, submerging their massive bodies during the hottest hours. Further afield, elephants arrive in long processions, seeking the water that allows them to sustain their enormous bodies and sustain themselves during times when drought ravages the soil. Beneath the surface, crocodiles lurk silently, using the current as a hunting corridor where prey, sooner or later, eventually approaches. Each one, from his own strategy, depends on the pulse of the Rufiji. However, this river is not limited to providing resources. It is also a relentless shaper of landscapes. Over the centuries, its floods have eroded cliffs, created new branches, and diverted its own course, forcing species to adapt to an environment that never remains the same. Sandbanks that today provide refuge for migratory birds may disappear tomorrow under a sudden flood. River islands, which provide tender grass for herbivores, form and disintegrate as easily as the wind blows the dry leaves of a baobab tree. During migration periods, the Rufiji River becomes the last major obstacle. Its fast-flowing waters, laden with mud and treacherous currents, separate the great herds of wildebeest and zebra from the more fertile lands to the south. It's not a simple crossing. Here, the collective intelligence of herbivores is put to the test, as they must calculate the exact moment to cross when the current won't carry away the youngest or weakest individuals. And when the herd launches itself, it's a stampede of bodies fighting against the inexhaustible force of the river, while on the banks, the crocodiles wait patiently, knowing that the current will, sooner or later, deliver to them a disoriented prey. For birds, the Rufiji is a highway of life. Aquatic species follow its meanderings, moving toward renewed fishing grounds, while birds of prey, such as the osprey, patrol from above, taking advantage of every school of fish trapped in isolated lagoons by the receding waters. The ability to fly gives these species the flexibility that land dwellers lack to migrate, explore, and return when the river renews. The Rufiji is also a silent trap for those who blindly depend on its generosity. When drought is extreme, the waters recede to such an extent that enormous lagoons become stagnant pools, concentrating hundreds of animals in small spaces. Competition becomes fierce, water is polluted, diseases spread. And amid this collapse, only the most resilient species, such as buffalo and hippopotamuses, manage to maintain their dominance. But even in its most relentless moments, the Rufiji River isn't an executioner. It's a forger. Every oscillation in its flow, every stretch it erodes, every diversion it creates forces Nyerere species to reinvent themselves, to develop new strategies, to optimize resources, to adjust their life cycles to the rhythm of a river that never stops. And it is in this perpetual dynamic, in this constant pulse between abundance and scarcity, where the essence of Nyerere lies. Not as a static sanctuary, but as a real-time evolutionary laboratory, where life, forced to adapt to the whims of water, reaches its purest and most resilient forms. At this point in Tanzania, there are no certainties except one. As long as the Rufiji keeps flowing, the cycle of life will continue, slowly carving out a kingdom where only those who embrace change will prosper. Across its vast plains, forests, and wetlands, this natural park displays a landscape where wildlife defies all expectations. This territory, marked by the immensity of the Rufiji River and a climate that oscillates between generosity and harshness, has shaped an ecosystem where survival depends not only on strength, but also on constant adaptation. In Nyerere, the traditional rules of the food chain have blurred. Predators face unprecedented challenges, prey hone their strategies, and birds find in the sky a refuge and an evolutionary advantage that allows them to thrive without limitations. Here, evolution is not a distant past. It is a daily process, a continuous adjustment to the demands of an environment that changes without warning. Success does not always belong to the strongest, nor defeat to the weakest. Cooperation, collective intelligence, and the ability to adapt have shaped a dynamic equilibrium where each species occupies its place, not by hierarchy, but by merit of survival. Nyerere is not just an African wildlife sanctuary. It's a living testament to natural resilience, an open laboratory where life, in all its forms, reinvents its own rules to persist. Every corner of this park holds a silent lesson about the fragility of balance and the power of adaptation. And although our journey ends here, Nyerere will continue its incessant cycle, challenging certainties, reminding us that in nature nothing is static and that true strength lies in the capacity for constant change and adaptation.